video at the end of class, as well as all the slides. So again, if I go too fast, don't worry about it. It'll all be posted. So the do now is get a notebook, pen and pencil, and turn your video on. Answer either of 2 questions in the chat. There's 2 questions, so you can answer one of the 2 in the chat. And the 2 questions that you can respond to are either, what is the craziest news that you've heard in the past week, or what's the best show or movie that you've watched in the past week? So what is the craziest news that you've seen or heard, and what is the what is the best show or movie? So go ahead and open up your chat and type into the chat right now, please. Craziest news I've heard this past week was also the protests, people protesting. So here's my question: if you think you need to go back to, you think it's time to end shelter in place, why are you wearing a mask? If you really think it's time to end the shelter in place, why are you wearing a mask? So that's the craziest news I heard this week. The show that I'm watching right now is called Ozark. It's about a dysfunctional family that is laundering money for drug dealers. Very good show. It's on Netflix. Okay, AP exam update. Students will take 2 45-minute online free response exam questions at home. 2 questions, okay, 2 FRQs. That's it, 45 minutes. You're supposed to log on to the testing platform 30 minutes prior to the start of testing. Check your email. You should be getting emails from the College Board. Okay, if you're not, stay to the end and talk to me about it. Students will be able to take your exam on any device. It does not require the lockdown browser. No lockdown browser. The full exam schedule is linked. Specific exam information is linked. Details on the length, format, and structure are linked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The entire document is, there's a link right there, and it will be on the slides that I'm going to share for today's class. Okay, if you have a question about this, type it into the chat. All right, these are the questions that you had on the multiple choice. This is how you did on the multiple choice. At this point, I kind of don't care about scores. I really care about completion, and we have 11 people didn't do it. So I'm less concerned with your scores than if you did it or not. I think if you did it and got a bad score, that's way better than not doing it. So our average score was 57%, which is actually not bad at all. All right, back to student questions. These are the questions that you all typed into the shared Google Doc. What did you want to go over? Assimilation, bilingualism, language families, acculturation, sequent occupants, hierarchical diffusion, etc., centrifugal force. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. Assimilation, we refer to it as assimilation, but really what we're talking about is cultural assimilation. It's the process by which a person or a group or a group's language and or culture come to resemble those of another group. It's also called acculturation. Really, it's assimilation to a different culture, typically the dominant culture. These 2 words are pretty much used in the same way in terms of our course. Now there's forced assimilation and there is voluntary assimilation. So here's a picture of recently made American citizens, right, who passed their citizenship test and became citizens, and they're voluntarily assimilating aspects of the American culture. But we also have examples of forced assimilation. Here we have Native Americans, Indians from the Plains tribes who were forcibly removed from their parents and put into Indian schools on the East Coast and forced to assimilate American customs and cultures, okay? Sequent occupants means the layers of imprints in a cultural landscape that reflect years of different human activity. So here we see in Athens, this is ancient Greece. So we see the culture or cultural landscape of ancient Greece and then more modern buildings. So we can see different layers of the cultural landscape from the ancient to the more modern. Hierarchical diffusion is diffusion that goes from the hearth to early adopters. Oftentimes those are celebrities or users of specific items. So for example, Crocs were first diffused by people on boats. North Face was first diffused by mountain climbers. And then eventually it's diffused to other people later on, okay? So that is the example of hierarchical diffusion, okay? Relocation diffusion is when people take the idea and they relocate to a new place, okay? So relocation diffusion is when you take the idea and relocate to a new place. An example of this would be quickly. Contagious diffusion is just person to person, right? And it spreads out evenly from the heart. So the example we had in class is silly bands, right? Person to person. Stimulus diffusion is also known as reterritorialization, and that is when you take the concept, but you adapt it for the local context. So for example, this is in India, they have McDonald's and they do not use beef, but they use vegetable burgers or fake meat, right? So that's an example of stimulus diffusion. Okay, for centripetal and centrifugal forces, you're going to encounter those this week for Unit 4. But a reminder, centrifugal forces are things that push a state apart, divide the state, centrifugal forces. So ethnic conflict, social injustice, poverty, dictators, religious intolerance, nationalism, loss of rights, etc. Centripetal hold things together, okay? Ethnic unity, tolerance, social, economic equity, just and fair legal system, charismatic leadership, etc., right? Common language and heritage are unifying forces. Okay, you're gonna have to open up your chat, so get it ready. I'm gonna give you a quick quiz. These are the language families of the world, and we already looked at this, but the Indo-European being the most extensive, and then you have Amerindian languages here in the Amazon, and in the northern part of North America. Afro-Asiatic, right, so that's Arabic. Sino-Tibetan, right, Chinese and Tibetan, okay? But in Europe, we have subfamilies, okay? This is a map of Europe. What subfamilies, type this into the chat, type your answer. What subfamily are the languages in part A of this map a part of? What subfamily? So it's Indo-European of the language family, but what subfamily? Very good, Valeria. Romantic, right? It's actually Romance, but you're on the right track. So Romance, these are all Romance languages. Okay. What about, excellent work, Valeria. What about B? What subfamily are the languages in B? Very good, James. Germanic, right? So that includes English, German, Dutch, Flemish, all of the Norwegian and Swedish. Those are all part of the Germanic language. How about C? What subfamily are C a part of? This would include, very good, Johanna, excellent. Slavic, that's right. So we have Slavic over here, and that includes Polish, Ukrainian, Russian, and then all Serbian and some of the languages of the Balkans. Excellent work. Okay, so this shows us the subfamilies of Indo-European. The three major are Romance, Germanic, and Slavic. All right. If we are good to go, I'm going to go on to the FRQs. Type 1 into the chat if we're okay to go. Please type 1 into the chat if we're okay to move on. Great. Okay, the FRQs. The performance, again, I care less about how we did and a lot more about what the amount of people who did it. So that was better than the multiple choice. We had everyone except for 7 students did it. So a high level of students did it, and a very high level of students got very good scores. So I was very impressed with how we did. I thought overall the FRQs were really good. The 2 of them were cultural diffusion and language, and the other was French bilingualism in Canada. Okay, overall, my feedback to everyone is the basic ideas were excellent, right? There are a few errors in terms of the basic ideas. You showed a good understanding of the basics. What was missing and what we really need to focus on for the next unit is details, full explanations. Okay, and one piece of feedback I read from the AP readers, the College Board, basically they say a lot of students know the basics, but the difference between people who pass the exam and don't pass the exam are the people who pass the exam are those who are able to put in details and full explanations into their answers versus the students who just are able to give definitions, okay? So that's really what we want to focus on when we do our practice later today. Okay, this is the first FRQ, cultural diffusion and language. Identify 2 specific means by which new expressions in popular culture are diffused globally. So specific means, we're looking for any of these, and media or technology are not acceptable. Here's a good example that gives me a lot of detail. One way how new expressions in popular culture are diffused globally is through technology. Social media platforms like Snapchat and Instagram makes it easy to spread news with a matter of seconds using technology. So very detailed, 2 full complete sentences, right? Another way that new expressions in popular culture is diffused globally is through celebrities. since they're so well known. Many people look up to celebrities and will do anything the celebrities do or say. The people that will use the new terms may spread it to their friends and family who will spread it even more, and so on. So really a good, detailed answer here, and that's a full credit answer. Part B, popular culture often spreads through a combination of different types of diffusion. Describe how terms, such as those shown in the table, diffuse spatially through each of the following processes: relocation, contagious, and hierarchical. Okay. Relocation, when a person moves. Contagious is person to person, and hierarchical is more connected, oftentimes celebrity, and they spread it down the hierarchy. This is an example of a type of answer I'd want to see from people. Terms can spread through relocation diffusion when someone moves to a new place. For example, someone from California who regularly uses selfie may move to Texas and influence their friends to use the term as well. Again, 2 sentences, right? This is not limited to just a simple 1-sentence answer. They're actually explaining the method of diffusion. A word can diffuse spatially through contagious diffusion when many people say it, so that the term can expand by person to person. Terms can be spread through, so that's, again, pretty complete answer here. And finally, terms can be spread through hierarchical when a certain groups, such as celebrities, first use it, and people in both urban and rural populations are then influenced, okay? So this is what I mean by level of detail. Part C, when new words diffuse, they confront barriers. Identify and explain 2 barriers to diffusion that are often encountered, even as new terms become more popular. Most people got these: distance or physical barriers. Some people even mentioned age barriers, linguistic barriers, folk or cultural barriers, right? But just simply stating them only gets you 1 point. You need to explain in order to get the full 2 points, right? One barrier encountered even as new terms become more popular is isolation. People who live in rural farming areas have low connectivity, right? So using vocab words that you know, and may not have access to phones or internet, so they will not encounter new terms or understand the meaning. That is identification plus explanation. That's exactly what we want here. Another barrier is language. Words translated into another language may lose its meaning. Also, immigrants, for example, who have just moved to America will most likely have trouble understanding the new term. So 2 examples are given here to make sure, absolutely sure, that the point is conveyed. Okay. For that question, for that FRQ, go ahead and type 1 into the chat if you're okay to move on, or type a question if you have a question about that FRQ that we just reviewed. Okay. Second FRQ deals with French bilingualism in Canada, and you're given a map here. It's a stimulus question. So you had to respond to this map. And the first question is very straightforward. You either get it or you didn't. Identify the primary language spoken by most inhabitants. It's French. If you didn't get that, you can still score very high on this question, right? You can still do very well on the question, even without getting part A, because that's only worth 1 point. Part B, positive impacts of bilingualism. All of these are potential positive impacts, and the way it's graded is 1 point for a basic explanation and 2 points for a full explanation, okay? So a lot of people scored that 1 point, but in order to get the 2 full points, you need to have more detail. Here's another student's example of a full detailed explanation. Bilingualism can have a positive impact on a country as it can make a country more culturally or ethnically diverse. With more cultural or ethnic diversities comes more rights for minorities within the country. Furthermore, bilingualism can help new immigrants feel more at home and provide them with a stronger sense of community. So this gives us multiple examples of how it can make a country more culturally or ethnically diverse. So this is a full credit answer here. 1, 2, 3 sentences. Part C, negative impacts of bilingualism. A lot of people mention cultural tension. Again, just saying cultural tension gets you 1. You have to explain what that means. Bilingualism can have a negative impact on a country because it can divide the 2 language groups, creating tension. For example, if the English speakers discriminate against the French speakers in Canada, this could create tension among cultures, and in extreme cases, it could potentially result in conflict or even the breakup of a country, given that one culture seeks independence. So, very good example and explanation for the full credit here. Finally, part D is worth 2. Discuss 2 reasons other than language why Canada does not fit the nation state concept. Multiple ethnicities, a lot of people put cultures, and some people put religion. One reason why Canada does not fit the nation state concept is because Canada contains people of multiple ethnic identities. There are many ethnic groups found within Canada, such as Quebec, and the inhabitants of a nation state tend to be all of the same ethnicity. A second reason Canada does not fit is because in a nation state, the nations inhabit typically all belong to the same nation or group of people. However, this is not the case with Canada's Indigenous citizens who consider themselves to be from different nations. Canada would most likely fall into the category of a multinational state. Again, excellent use of the vocab rather than a nation state. For both these FRQs, the basic ideas were there, but the details and full explanations were not always. If you have a question on either of those, please type it now. And if not, and you're ready to take your practice FRQ with your small group, go ahead and type one into the chat. Okay, so this is the focus for our next FRQ, okay? The focus is forming complete sentences with lots of detail. So these are not outlines today. I want to see complete sentences and I want to see a lot of detail, okay? This is the question. It's a very straightforward and easy question. I actually posted a lecture on it. Define the term lingua franca, identify and describe one historical factor that contributed to the worldwide use of English. Historical factor, and I want to see 3 sentences minimum for part B. A is fine to have 1 sentence, but B needs to be 3 sentences. Identify and explain 2 examples that show how globalization, right? Identify and explain 2 examples that show how globalization is contributing to English becoming the world's lingua franca. For that one, we're looking for 4 to 6 sentences minimum, okay? So that, this is the practice FRQ. I'm gonna post into the chat right now. English is the most likely, okay, define lingua franca. There's 3 types of definitions. Basically, a language facilitating communication or trade between people of different native languages. Part B, historical factors, British colonialism, imperialism, role of US military, rise of diplomatic and American diplomatic economic power, migration of English speakers, early global popularity of English language art films, English language arts, religion, and social status, okay? Finally, globalization, music, radio, film, TV, internet, English, aviation in English, emigration from English-speaking countries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's see how we did, okay? So group 1, lingua franca is language facilitates trade and communication, very good. One factor is British colonialism, in which people who are colonized were forced to adopt English as their language. To this day, many former colonies still use English even after declaring independence. For example, Nigeria is the biggest country in Africa and it chose to use English as official language, okay? So we're looking at about 3 or 4 sentences. That's very good for part B. Part C, the first example of how English becoming the world's lingua franca is through music and radio, since some of the songs have English lyrics. This is an example of what I would like to see more to get your full 2 points, right? Another sentence, right? More examples, okay? One historical factor for, this is group 2, that contributed to the worldwide use of English includes European colonization. European colonizers would force the English language upon the new colonies they controlled and forced assimilation. I love this answer because you're using the term assimilation. They use violence and oppression, right? Another good vocab term, to force the language upon these people and created a fear. If they didn't use English, they would face punishment. This is really an excellent example, okay? That's really what we're looking for. An example would be the internet and how globalization is contributing to English becoming the world's lingua franca, is how the majority of the internet is in English, and as LDCs become more developed, good, right? LDCs, we're using vocab terms. They move towards the internet, which is predominantly in English. Another example is Hollywood and movies, right? Hollywood is known for creating world-renowned movies seen across the world through globalization, okay? So that's the level of detail that we're looking for, right? We want to have more than just 1 sentence, right? A couple sentences minimum, and we want to make sure that we really expand on our answers. So what I'm seeing in most of the groups is that you understand the basics, but you really want to get specific. Here's another example that's really good and specific, right? Using the terms Facebook, Google, right? Media platforms, 60% of the internet in English, right? Quoting stats. So this is really good, right? That's what we're looking for here. Okay, Europeans began colonization, spread it to all these different continents, brought their language with them, slowly diffused through the entire country, right? Okay. So this is what we're talking about, having a higher level of detail, right? Don't rush through the questions, especially on the AP exam when we're looking at, 2 questions to decide your entire, your entire AP exam score. And then using the AP classroom as practice, right? To actually spend the full 25 minutes answering these, okay? Go ahead and type 1 into the chat if you are good to go, and type a question if you have one. Okay. I really appreciate everyone attending class today, and I appreciate you all, contributing to the group discussion and to the group project. So that was, or the group FRQ today. That was excellent. Unit 4 is already posted on Google Classroom. Go ahead and get started on that. That's politics. It's a very challenging unit. 2 very challenging FRQs. Again, I'll grade those as soon as I can, as soon as you post them, and I'll give you specific feedback on those.